Hello and welcome to the Ilene Silverman Show. I'm your host Ilene, and on this week's program, our guests discuss the legacy of filmmaker Richard Norman and the campaign to preserve the Norman Studios. And a Richard Norman film will be highlighted in the upcoming exhibit at the Cade Museum. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us for our program. I'm very pleased to introduce my guest, Barbara Wingo, Vice President, Norman Studios Silent Film Museum, located in Jacksonville, Florida. And Barbara, it is wonderful to welcome you and to have you here. We've longtime friends. We've talked about your passion for Norman Studios and silent films, among many other things that you have accomplished in your life, including attorney with University of Florida and professor of history there. And so I can see history is important to you.
Well, thank you so much, Ilene, for having me on your program.
Certainly, with pleasure. And going back to that history, set the stage so we can understand Norman Studios, Richard Norman, by telling us about Jacksonville in the early days when it was a center for filmmaking.
As you might know, filmmaking basically started in New York and Chicago, also New Jersey, cold climes. So that during the winter, it was difficult to film. One, it was difficult to film outside because you had to film outside because you needed the light. And not only that, your film would fog up because of the extreme cold temperatures. So very early on, there was a desire to move, at least during the winter months, to a place that was more conducive to
sunny
filming. Yes. And here was Jacksonville, fairly newly rebuilt after its big fire at the turn of the century, and also directly online with the railroad, and relatively hospitable, actually very hospitable, and with the right kind of climate.
I can just see all those people boarding the train, heading for Jacksonville now. I mean, it's where the elite, the celebrities, the important people, we would say, were coming.
And in 1907, Cade Company, which was the first company to come to Jacksonville, came to Jacksonville and began filming there. And then eventually, approximately 30 companies came to Jacksonville during those winter months, and about 300 films were made in Jacksonville during the period that I referred to.
Quite a lot, yes. That is it's impressive.
Impressive, and one of the remnants of that is that in 1960, Eagle Film Company from Chicago decided that it would build a studio in Jacksonville, or in the environs of Jacksonville, Arlington. And there they would have all the necessary facilities for making films. So not only would they have the set area, they would have the area for developing films, for editing films,
Everything
for the whole
right
thing.
there, right.
With the idea that other film companies that were in Jacksonville will use their facilities, because the bad thing about being in Jacksonville was you had to send your film back to New York.
Okay, I understand.
Unfortunately, this didn't quite make it. And as we all know, Hollywood, with
I know.
its accoutrements, etc., became the
beckoning.
film capital. But nevertheless, Eagle Film actually took over a cigar factory, which they made into their production building.
Right.
They built 4 other buildings on the property. They built a pool. They built a they had generators, so they had a self-sufficient city there, much like what we think of as Universal City
Exactly,
in California.
like different lots, so to
Exactly.
speak, for the different kind of scenes. And,
Right.
Yes,
And
yes.
so several films were made there, some of which still actually exist.
And that Eagle Film Company, those 5 buildings, is what eventually became Norman Laboratories. Of course,
so
I'm switching
You're
into
kind
Richard
of moving
Norman.
into
Sorry,
that.
I
Yes,
moved too
that's
fast on
fine.
that.
But eventually, Richard Norman would buy the Eagle Film Complex, and it would become Norman Studios.
Right, okay. Of course, we have to go back now and say, who is this gentleman, Richard Norman?
Richard Norman started out, well, actually, interestingly enough, he was born in Middleburg and raised in Jacksonville. He moved to the Midwest, and he was in Kansas City, Des Moines, Chicago. And at that period in his life, which is approximately 1912, he
right.
began to do something that other filmmakers did at that particular point in time, which were home talent movies.
Now, before we get to that, Barbara, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
But stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back talking about Norman Studios. And Barbara, share more with us about Richard Norman and his hometown movies.
These were movies that he made through the Midwest and the South at various towns in those areas. And they were made with a standardized script, and the primary one that he made was called The Wrecker, which was rotated around a railroad wreck as the climax, although after the climax there was a happy ending and a wedding.
Right. I mean, I love the plot line. I can imagine it. It's beautiful, right? Everybody ends up happy in the end, despite
Except
the train
the villain.
wreck. Well,
Yes.
that's true. That's true. But the whole and trains were the important mode of travel, so it all fits.
Absolutely.
It all fits. And it fits so well that one was done in, produced in Gainesville.
That is correct. In January and February of 1918, Norman made a film in Gainesville, and the Lyric Theater was the showplace for the film.
Oh, I mean, that is a rich source of history. We hope that some viewer out there will go, I remember my great-grandmother was in that film, and get in touch with you.
Absolutely.
There's a history waiting
Absolutely.
there. Yes.
Now, in 1918, actually, Richard Norman was considering moving on from these local talent movies to something called race films. Race
Yes.
films were films that were done by several independent producers that were designed to counteract the stereotypical racist portrayals of African Americans
Exactly.
in most motion pictures. And so he took the plot of The Wrecker and expanded it, took most of the actual advertising types of materials for The Wrecker, used them as well, and made The Green-Eyed Monster, which ended up being a tremendous success. So therefore, he began to make more of these race films. Now, race films,
Right, explain
and
more.
these are films that are made specifically with non-stereotypical African American casts.
Exactly.
In this case, all African American casts in non-stereotypical roles. They have the roles of the railroad inspector, of the flying ace, of the various roles that
Right.
anyone would have in a movie.
Black or white.
Correct.
Yes. So it was a whole different perspective, especially at a time that was not conducive and forgiving of that. I mean, Richard Norman was a pioneer in a sense.
This was the height of Jim Crow.
Exactly.
There's no question about that. He was not the only filmmaker. There were other filmmakers doing this, but one of the few that was actually successful doing race films. And this is probably the primary reason that Norman Studios is a National Historic Landmark. It is the only
Well
race film
recognized.
studio that still exists.
In our country,
In the whole
right?
country, yes. So after he made The Green-Eyed Monster, he made several more films. The Bulldogger, Crimson Skull were made in Oklahoma. The Regeneration, and then another film that he made, and
Yes.
one that we want to mention in particular because it actually still exists.
Yes, and it's coming to Gainesville.
Is The Flying Ace,
Indeed.
which is a film that was released in 1926.
Right, and give just a little plot line because it is most unusual dealing with World War One.
In this film,
that-
the hero is supposedly an African-American flyer coming back as a hero from
World
the
War I.
Air Force.
Right.
But of course, no African-Americans were actually allowed to be in the American Air Force. So this, again, is very aspirational. But he
Exactly.
is a railroad detective, and the story centers around his finding out the solution to a mystery that occurs. And then, of course, there's also a young lady involved in the story.
Okay, well then there's always got to be a true love scenario too. But this is outstanding and we are so pleased that our Cade Museum will be showcasing this. We're going to take another break and then we're going to talk more about that. Stay with us, we'll be right back. We're back talking about Norman Studios, and I'm pleased to introduce Stephanie Bales, Executive Director, Cade Museum for Creativity and Invention. And Stephanie, I'm glad you're joining us, and I welcome you.
Thank you. We're happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much because this is such a perfect fit. Cade Museum, Richard Norman, silent films. Enlighten us, how did all this come to pass and moving forward together? Tell us how you and Barbara came to connect for this.
Well, it's an interesting thing. At the Cade Museum, we try to teach science through the lens of invention, and we also throw a little bit of creativity and imagination in there. And we do this by having different subject matter every 6 weeks in the museum. So every time you come in, there will be a different experience. And it just so happened that this summer, our theme is First Flight, beginning on June 12th, and then is immediately followed by film, optics, and photography.
Okay, this is a double fit.
It is. And so Barbara and Phoebe Miles, our founder, have been talking about this for some time, and I think Barbara can speak to it a little bit more than I, but it just happened at the right moment. And
Yes,
I
I
think
can see.
the pilot, the Aces in Motion, is the right film for the right time for us.
Yes, I can see where the Flying Ace is the perfect fit
Yeah.
for this whole exhibit. And Barbara, even Richard Norman himself and Dr. Cade, it just all together.
Well, as the name of the museum is for creativity and invention, I can't even think of a better fit. Richard Norman was an inventor. We didn't even go into that in our previous
I know,
conversation.
we can't get all this in.
We can't get all this in, but he invented a cola. He invented a camera phone, which was a means for talking pictures. So he was an inventor, and he was also very creative. Obviously, you're an artist when you're creating films.
Indeed.
And he was very much an entrepreneur, which is something that Dr. Cade would very much appreciate as well.
Yes, so it's a perfect fit. And the fact that the Flying Ace film was preserved. And so we will be able to actually see a silent film, which, by the way, is not that silent after all, because it usually has music accompaniment. So that's just...
Silent films were never silent.
Yeah.
They always had some kind of musical accompaniment.
Yes,
That's correct.
So how will things be set up, or tell us a little more about what we will find at the Cade?
So we're setting up almost like a mini theater, be complete with velvet curtain. And Barbara and Norman Studios is graciously providing the film and a lot of the supporting material that we'll have on exhibit in the area. And then when we were getting ready to come on, we were talking about some wonderful things we might do together that would incorporate aspects of that real silent movie theater experience, like live music and a big
Exactly.
screen. So
Yes, and now we know that the studios, as we said, is based in Jacksonville, and of course, many people that we've talked to about this, talked about Arlington, remember some of this history, and they will be joining us in Gainesville to embellish that and to talk about the future for Norman Studios also.
Well, we certainly hope that will be the case. I might point out in that regard that in 1930, Richard Norman's wife, Gloria Norman, opened a dance studio which was open for many, many years in
yes.
Arlington, and there are many alumna of that are still around, and so we'd love to hear from them as well.
Right, to speak to that. And when you talk about the flight exhibit and the film exhibit, will there be other parts for guests to, when you visit the Cade to see, there'll be, to understand the complexity and the freedom of flight?
absolutely. I mean, the film is just one aspect
Will
that
be one aspect
supports
to fit.
the topic. Every Saturday, we'll feature a scientist, a researcher, an inventor that focuses on one aspect of flight. We'll be looking at engineering concepts, some really new innovations that are happening, even Earth-orienting satellites and such. So there will be a little bit for everyone. And we'll focus on getting our community partners in place. So we'll
Definitely.
be promoting this, both the film and the topic, very much.
And I see how this just fits, again, so beautifully, Barbara, into Richard Norman and his whole passion and his way of thinking and what he brought to film, to silent film.
I would agree absolutely. So
It is really...
we're very much looking forward to this
indeed.
exhibit, and I think people will also really enjoy learning the basic history of film in Jacksonville and Norman, which will be part of our exhibit.
Of your exhibit, yes.
In conjunction with the film.
Yes, because when I've talked to, we have lots of family in Jacksonville. When I've talked to many people, they go, I didn't know about some of that.
Right.
And I think there's, as you who treasure history, there is always so much that we need to learn so we can appreciate where we are now by learning what has happened before. And so thank you, Stephanie, and everyone at the Cade Museum for making this possible. We still have more to cover, so stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back talking about Norman Studios. And Barbara, first of all, congratulations with your collaboration with the Cade Museum. Exceptional opportunity for all of us. And so just confirm again those dates for the opening reception, and so we in the community can put it on our calendar now.
Well, the exhibit itself will start on June 12th, and the opening reception will be on June 14th.
Okay, Friday evening.
Correct.
It's going to be quite special. And now that you're bringing part of Norman Studios and the Flying Ace to Gainesville, for a minute take us back to Jacksonville and what is happening with the Norman Studios Silent Film Museum and the property and how that is evolving.
The property was rescued many years ago from a state of extreme desuetude by the purchase through the city of Jacksonville. So Jacksonville actually owns 4 of the buildings.
All right.
Another building is owned by a church, as well as the area that used to be the water feature. So we have a lot of tasks before us.
Yes.
The exteriors were renovated of the Jacksonville portion. However, we need
Great.
to do the interiors of all of those 4 buildings,
Right.
and we need to purchase the 5th building. So you can see that
Okay,
we,
you've
as
got
a
a
small volunteer group, have a
Yes.
lot before us.
Yes, you do. A lot of tasks. Okay, but when you think of the goals, the mission, give us your viewpoint.
Well, the
Share
first
that.
thing would be to make, and this is primarily having to do with the major production building, make that into a world-class museum that would highlight silent films and more specifically race films.
Excellent.
So that's first. And
Right,
then
to keep
to
that
make it
history.
a kind of a center even for filmmaking in the future would be a long-term goal.
Okay, wonderful. To bring that back to Jacksonville too
Yes.
would be exceptional. And you've had some events, like what about your Silent Sundays?
We do have Silent Sundays, which you can, of course, look on our website, which Actually, another thing on our website is not only the announcement of Silent Sundays, which are
Correct.
quarterly, but we have now a virtual museum on race films. So you can learn a lot more
Exceptional.
about that
Great.
particular topic
Aspect.
there. And so please visit our website. It also
Definitely.
tells you how you can donate and how you can become a
Well,
member.
Yes, and you need volunteers, you need monetary donations, you need people with a vision to join you
That is
to
correct.
make it happen.
That is absolutely
Yes,
correct.
yes.
And we will welcome you.
Good. Thank
Because
you.
at this point, we can't be open even because we don't have anything that is inside the buildings. So
Right.
we open them up for tours. You can set up a tour. The information is on our website. You can set
All
up a
right.
tour that will be given to you personally if you wish one.
you
And
wish,
I
okay.
would hope you would after this.
Yes, and once people see the Flying Ace and see the quality of the film, and it does take you back in time because, as we were saying, they're exceptional films. They were their own genre, not like silent films and then talking films, but their own art form.
That is correct. And one of the things that I think, if we're going to talk about Norman Studios, that's interesting about the Flying Ace is that it is the only one that actually was totally filmed on that studio property.
Oh, see,
So you
even
actually
more
see
special.
the buildings
Yes.
that as they existed in 1926
And
in
see
the
how,
film.
how they used it into all aspects
And then
of that
if you
movie.
come to our exhibit, you'll see some of the ways that they filmed the flight sequences as well.
Oh, now that's got to be fascinating, thinking of the time frame and how they pulled that off.
Yes,
Yes.
pulling
yes.
it off is a good way to put it.
I understand. And you know, you have so many different interests, but what has drawn you to Norman Studios and silent film and this aspect of our history?
Well, I think I've always been interested in films, so that is part of my
Okay.
interest. I am also very interested in historic preservation, which of course this is a major historic preservation.
Yes, but that's a driving force.
Driving force here.
Yes.
And history in general. And this period of history turns out to be endlessly interesting and also relevant. So
Yes.
so many things come together with Norman Studios.
I can see, and I think all of us, when we visit the Cade Museum for the exhibit starting June 12th or coming to the reception June 14th, we will see that, appreciate it, and share that with you. And I truly appreciate your bringing such valuable information to us about Norman Studios and the silent film era, and to Stephanie Bales for joining us and the whole Cade Museum for being a partner in this. So thank you very much.
And thank you again.
My pleasure. And I hope I will see you at the Cade Museum. I'm so glad you tuned in, and I hope you'll join us next week. Take care.